The final day of arguments in Donald Trump's hush money trial had all the trappings of a Hollywood movie. Angry supporters, furious protesters, the judge clashing with the defence, and even a surprise cameo from Robert De Niro.
You're not going to intimidate. That's what Trump does, to try to intimidate.
We New Yorkers used to tolerate him when he was just another grubby real estate hustler masquerading as a big shot, a two-bit playboy lying his way into the tabloids. But this city is pretty accommodating. We make room for clowns.
While Donald Trump was inside a New York courthouse for closing arguments in his felony trial, actor Robert De Niro was outside, taking advantage of the press gaggle.
If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. Do we want him running this country and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm dictator for life?
De Niro stood alongside two police officers who'd served in the US Capitol during the Jan 6 riot, later clashing with Trump supporters who clearly hadn't seen his turn in Cape Fear.
Democrats, you are gangsters. You are gangsters.
The two-time Oscar winner has recently lent his voice to a new campaign ad.
Trump wants revenge, and he'll stop at nothing to get it.
And was in Manhattan on behalf of Joe Biden. So he at least had that in common with Donald.
I'm here because of crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country.
Trump was also there to hear closing arguments in his Stormy Daniels hush money trial, where he's accused of falsifying business records to hide their affair and win the election.
Donald Trump did nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. This is everybody saying it.
His lawyer today doing all he could to cast doubt on damning testimony from Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, dubbing him
the gloat, the greatest liar of all time.
The judge reprimanding Trump's lawyer for suggesting a guilty verdict would equal prison time.
That's going to sting. You do not want to finish up your closing and then have the judge bring the jury back and go, that thing you said at the end, inappropriate.
The defence spoke for a whopping 3 hours, which was nothing compared to the prosecution, who went for almost 5.
This is a sham, it's insane, and it needs to stop.
The jury will now begin deliberations ahead of the verdict, a verdict Trump critics and supporters say could alter the course of US democracy forever.
This is not a threat. This is a reality.
We are live from the lands of the Kulin Nation, and Glenn Kirschner is an attorney and former US prosecutor. Glenn, let's start with the one thing we all want to know. Will the jury find Donald Trump guilty?
You know, it is said to be a fool's errand to try to predict what a jury will do. So let me be foolish for a moment. As a former career prosecutor, one of the things I had to do day in and day out was assess the strength of the evidence in a criminal case, the quality and the quantity of evidence. And based on what I've seen being reported out of the courtroom and the transcripts I've been reviewing of the proceedings, it looks like the evidence is quite strong. The prosecution's case came in well. The witnesses withstood cross-examination. If a jury of Donald Trump's peers convicts him of any of these felony crimes, I think Judge Merchan, who is a very serious, experienced judge, will recognize that if he doesn't impose some sort of consequence, some sort of punishment, and that would look like a period of incarceration, then he will not deter others who might choose the path that Donald Trump chose, to commit felony crimes in violation of New York state law. So I have a feeling that you're going to see Judge Merchan impose at least some period of incarceration. So this entire endeavor was not all for naught.
Well, before we convict and then imprison Donald Trump, let's maybe step back and just look at the arguments and the way they played out. The defence's closing arguments seem to hinge most strongly on Michael Cohen being untrustworthy. To be fair, by Cohen's own admission, he's a liar and a thief. You know him. Is he trustworthy?
I think when somebody pleads guilty to their own crimes, they take responsibility for those crimes, and then they testify about the crimes of others, typically the sort of criminal fish that are higher on the food chain, so to speak. Those folks can be very compelling as witnesses, and that's what I think Michael Cohen did quite credibly. And then because he was corroborated, his testimony was affirmed, it was supported in so many different ways, through the testimony of other witnesses, through the records, false business ledger entries, a covert recording of he and Donald Trump talking about involving themselves in this corrupt hush money scheme, and importantly, reimbursement checks being written by Donald Trump himself on his personal bank account. it seems like that corroboration will likely win the day in the eyes of the jurors.
Well, they also claim Trump never had sex with Stormy Daniels. Is anyone likely to buy that?
No, and that presents a real challenge for the defense. You know, here's why. When Stormy Daniels testified quite credibly that she had this encounter with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's defense attorney, Todd Blanche, stood up in opening statements and said, my client never had sex with that woman, I think the jurors probably feel like Todd Blanche tried to put one over on them. And once the jurors disbelieve something a defense attorney, or for that matter, a prosecutor has urged them to believe, they tend to view everything else that lawyer asks them to believe through that lens of, listen, you already may have lied to me once, so I am not going to be inclined to believe that Donald Trump didn't know about hush money payments. I think the stronger evidence and argument is that Donald Trump knew precisely what was going on here.
Now, Glenn, not only you're our man in the know, but also you're mates with Robert De Niro, which is amazing. I have a two-part question here. One, what was the strategy of De Niro being out front, slamming Trump? And two, could you ask him if he'll do a sequel to the criminally underrated film Dirty Grandpa?
Yeah, he is quite a legendary actor, and he hosted our Team Justice gathering in New York City not too long ago, so I have the privilege of knowing him fairly well at this point. So, you know, he has made the decision, and I think he made this decision with his eyes open, that he's running the risk of alienating potentially wide swaths of his fan base. But he said, you know what, democracy is more important than my box office receipts. What they wanted to do was take advantage of the media that was assembled there to argue why Donald Trump is bad for democracy. For goodness sakes, he's somebody who has declared he will be a dictator on day one if reelected, and I think we ought to believe him in that. That's why I think the Robert De Niro's and others have stood up and spoken out against them, even if, you know, they might burn some of their own capital in the process.
Not a definite no to Dirty Grandpa.
Well, yeah, I think Glenn avoided the question. I think that was
too hard hitting for you, Glenn, I guess.
Glenn, we really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.